Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Design Recharge. This is episode 203, and we are re-recording because I had a user error the other day. So I was so interested in what Thomas was talking about, and today is Thomas Jockin. So we are going to try and do our awesome interview that we had on Wednesday, doing it today. So Thomas Jockin is the founder of Type Thursdays, as well as a type designer and a regular designer, but he designs typeface. He's also worked on the Google SWAT team. And so there's a lot of really cool, interesting things that we're going to talk about. So I don't want to give too much away. Let's get started and jump in. So Thomas, give us a little bit of your background and when did you fall in love with type?
Well, Diane, thank you again for having me. I hope we can recreate the magic of the first time when we were together. So the question was, how did I find type design? How did this happen? Well, the short answer is I was always interested in art. My background was mainly in painting. That's what I wanted to focus on. But then I basically applied to all the art schools in New York because I'm from Long Island, New York, 50 miles out east. Parsons was the one that had the best scholarships. I went there. And in my sophomore year, I made the choice to go into communication design, and I met a type designer. And that's what changed everything. Because up until then, type design was really not part of the equation in any way.
Right. It wasn't so in your ballpark. You didn't, right, yeah.
No. It was a type designer named Joshua Darden. He had just started his foundry about, probably a year or two at that point. And I fell in love with his way of thinking, his way of considering how he thought about type, how he discussed it. It was completely nothing what I expected. And I was basically at the end of that first class, if not that first semester, definitely I was like, this is what I'm doing. I want that mind. I don't know what it's going to take, but whatever, I want that mind and this mind at 19. I knew that much.
Which was amazing at 19 to be that committed or that interested in something and not wishy-washy, because that was it before. So this was sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
Freshman year, you told the story where you were like, somebody told me I was not the best drawer or whatever, right?
Well, here's the thing. Actually, in the painting drawing classes, I was awesome. Because that was my natural affinity. I mean, that's kind of what I was about. Especially the painting, and even the color theory classes, like just in terms of the application of color and how to consider it and be sensitive about it. I had all of that. It was just when it was like hardcore execution, like drawing 50 squares of lines, right? Like that. Like I think this is kind of why I work for myself. I start independent ventures is because I'm very rebellious as a personality, in the sense that if I don't buy into what you're telling me to do, I will just rebel and fight out.
Right.
Completely. So I just had constant fights with my professors back in my freshman year. And I was constantly being like ridiculed and talked down by the professors and kind of within the social totem pole of the class. It was like I was friends with the best, I guess we can call it the cool designers. They knew my potential. They were cool with me. But in terms of when critiques would go down, I'd be constantly like shut down and just like crushed. I would like walk out of class with like C's all over the place.
But it's so mechanized. And that was what you didn't necessarily like. You liked the more, the painting and drawing that you could kind of be more free flowing or organic maybe, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. It was like, I hate using a left brain, right brain conversation. I always get confused which one's which, but definitely like more like sensitivity, awareness, kind of totality thinking. It's when you ask me to go really this, it's like this versus this. When it's this, I was just my natural ability. That's why I was in art and design. When this comes in, it just it didn't rub me the right way, which is incredibly ironic that I became a type designer when so much of it is this all the time. It's really funny.
Right. So then we also talked about one of the things that pulled you in to design was the social aspect, right? Because you thought, so what was your reasoning?
Yes. So what happened was when I was debating which major you're going to select, because in your freshman year, it's a general, everyone takes it. All of the design majors take the freshman group. So you have fashion design. Some people know they wanted to be fashion designers, architect. I was waffling between the two, like the fine art department or design. I visited the chairs of the departments. I asked for appointments, got them, and I got tours of the classes happening there, and talked to the chairs of those departments. And the main note I noticed from the main emphasis from the fine art professor, the chair, was it's very isolating. You're just like, and for some people they love that you're in a room and you're painting, and then you come together for the exhibition or for critiques with your class, and then you go back to the studio, and then you just plop around and you just do your thing. Very isolating. The amount of social contact's not that much, but from design, I just knew from talking to people about it, there were so many players involved. There's printing, there's copywriters, and it's inherently a collaborative episode. And that's what I was like, oh, it's super exciting. I love people. I love socializing. So that's fantastic. Again, that's the irony. That's why in type design, it's you go fully into that in a box forever, and then you pop your head out like every once in a while. And that's why Type Thursday got started. So,
but going back, your sophomore year, you started that year, which I think is the social aspect of learning, but it's really intense learning. You started being an apprentice, and you apprenticed for 3 years at your professor's company, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of nice having a second redo because we get to just kind of refresh the points.
We go straight, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So what happened was at the end of the first semester in my Type 1 class with Josh Darden, I made my commitment. I basically went to my chair. I said, okay, what do we need to do for internships? Got all the paperwork done. I rolled up to Josh last day of class, and I was like, Josh, I'm working for you. End the conversation. I'm doing it for credit. You don't have to pay me. Here's the paperwork. It's already signed by the chair. You just have to sign it. So I kind of gave the guy no choice. He was going to have to hire. He was going to have to get me in there. After the first semester, he was like, they're good. It's fine. You're enthusiastic. You want to make this happen. You're in. And that became the start of a 3-year apprenticeship in type design.
So I just want to clarify, what was it that just got under your skin that you just knew you had to gnaw deeper at this? Like, what was it? Because that's really early on. And we talked about this the other day, that it was like a marriage. I mean, you have been committed to this, and you were really young when you made this commitment.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I understand. Well, let's see. It's hard to describe in some ways. I think the main point, what drew me in this was, one was the expectation. My expectation of typography when I was preparing for the class was super mechanic. Like, I thought I was going to fail out. I was going to like it. So I studied all summer to prepare for this and try to compensate for my obvious weakness in this field. And then Josh came in with this, it was, you know what it was? It was like this certain, it's like great athletes who do these things that are super precise and very technical, but they seem so effortless in how they do it. They transcended this into broadness. They have a certain agileness in their mind, in their way of thinking. They can take in all these data points because what type design really ultimately is this intersection of figure ground space relationships, which is what painting deals with. That's what painting, drawing all deal with.
Right.
Language, linguistics, and computers and technology, computer science, technology. Right. Especially the modern edition of it, what we have since the 1980s. That's an incredible, weird intersection of a lot of different things, and how it gets expressed requires a lot of different hats of knowledge along the way. And that's as a 19-year-old, I saw my chair, my communication design at the graphic design department, right, at Parsons. When he found out I was doing his apprenticeship, because he was one who hired Josh to teach, he said essentially that was an excellent choice. I have yet to ever meet a dumb type designer. All of them are incredibly intelligent, and you have to be, because of the amount of knowledge you have to absorb and gain. And to have any kind of mastery in it requires that, like I said, you're literally like a high performance athlete in that way. Like that. So and you can see that specifically in how they look at type and how they consider it, because that's the other side of it. There's the raw knowledge, right? Of this great potential if you choose to commit to it, so you can get out of it. Mm-hmm. The other side is, it's like the language and writing it's a technology we've had for civilization's time, right? So as a result, we're so used to it. It's just normal. It's like a cell phone now. It's like a cell phone used to be at one point, which is revolutionary technology. Now it's whatever. It's just move on with your life. Right. However, watching how these designers thought about type, and you can just drill down on this all the information, observations about it, and something that I thought was all air, right? This kind of observing reality in a way that was always there, but you never saw it. I was incredibly drawn by that, you know, and that like this promise that if you train and cultivate yourself, you gain this new knowledge and this new ability to see things that were always there but not accessible to you. That's for me the two parts of design I thought was really interesting.
Did you see yourself as different than your counterparts, that your fellow students?
It's hard to say. I would say let me put it this way. I think I was a very high strong person. Like I was a very go-getter, hustler, action-packed kind of guy, and kind of a dork to top it off. Like I was super serious. Like I was all business all the time. That did not mean very endearing to the group, to my peers, a lot of ways, to be honest with you. But yeah, ironically, within the type design community, I'm like the most loosey-goosey of the group. So it's like I never really belonged anywhere. You know, I've constantly had this issue of always feeling I never really belonged, right? I was like a little too hot for this. I was a little too cool for that. It was always a very bizarre scenario. So that's why in that context, I think the biggest gift Josh ever gave me was his investment in me, right? He kind of created this space for me and really invested in me for this long period of time in a way that way beyond any kind of mercantile exchange of just an intern. Like I purposely call it a master-apprentice relationship because it really was not an internship style thing. Like, you know how you know? Is because how giddy are you to do the trash? So you got the trash, they go deposit a check. Like I was actually enthusiastic about it. How interesting is that? Like versus like you ask an intern to do it, they'll do it, but they're not exactly like enthusiastic about for that behavior or that request. Versus me, I'm like, oh, I'm helping Josh. This is awesome. I can do whatever it takes to help Josh. I'm here for him. You know what I mean?
But that's maybe one of your superpowers, because a lot of people don't look at it like that. They just see it as a duty. But if you're working for an entrepreneur, and you are entrepreneurial for sure, those things have to get done. Is that the best use of Josh's time to take the trash out? No. So you are helping his business go forward by doing those things and depositing the checks and doing. And I feel like a lot of times the people feel like, oh, I'm just getting the grunt work. But if you didn't do it, then the person who runs the business would have to do it. So I feel like it's one of those aspects that you really have to come in knowing not what's in it for me, but how. I always feel like this with you are not applying for a job. You're applying for how you can help somebody's business grow. You have to be a different cog. You can't just be a regular factory worker doing the same thing that 3 other people in the company are doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very true wisdom, but it's very hard. I mean, I think the only reason why at 19 I had that mindset was because there was this larger commitment to something much, much larger. I mean, it related to, there was a Q&A we did in the last recording, right? Where the question was about inspiration and how do you manage that from just being a copycat? I mean, the preface I replied back was, what's your length of investment? You know, like for me, design is not this 9-to-5 job I do, right? It's this like profession that like I'm dedicating 30 to 50 years of time towards, and this is towards that project in some way. It's a much larger scale of thinking than just like a check to pay for the weekend. You know what I mean? Like it's order to scale of thought was totally different. I didn't even know at the time.
And we talked about this the other day, and I said, well, how did you make it? You know, how were you able, because then you worked for maybe another couple of years for Josh after you graduated, or you worked.
No, I was off to the wilderness.
So, but you were still learning, but you had this commitment that you had to do 10 years, right? Or was it?
Yes, it was 10 years.
10 years of training. And I said, well, gosh, you know, that is a very unique perspective. Most people are like, whatever, I'm going to make $40,000 and I'm going to go out and I'm not going to, you're really held down at school a lot of times because of so many commitments that you have to do. And it's a lot of learning. And then you just want to go and play and rest, a lot of people. But you did not have that mentality, which I think is so amazing and unique, and what makes you as strong as you are now. Because I do believe you're like an athlete, a professional type athlete.
I guess so. I mean, there were consequences. I mean, listen, I say this, there were consequences. I think the biggest one, I'll be frank with you, was 2008 when I graduated undergrad in 2008. And what happened was, quite frankly, I got overconfident in the sense that I thought Josh was going to hire me full time. But then the floor dropped out. Josh could not do it. And I was just, and instead of me preparing, like watching my fellow graduates get their planning to get their stuff together to get out there, I was just sitting back. I took I think a month on vacation too, by the way. Like I was so overconfident that I was going to be perfectly great and fine. Right. So when I come back from the trip, you know, I basically had a panic attack because it's like the biggest issue was it's not, here's the thing, this was the crisis at the time. I had invested at that point, like my entire undergraduate career, instead of going out, instead of socializing, instead of all that, like every available moment I was at that studio training, you know, every holiday there, every weekend there, you know, between classes there. It was a full commitment on that process. So as a result, then like when you do all that work and then you end up in the same position as someone who was just hanging out and dicking around, quite frankly, for 4 years, it's kind of like, why did you even bother, dude? Like, what was the point? Now, obviously, I can say you worked past that. But I'm being honest with you, that really was a challenging moment at that time. That kind of, because there's no guarantee of success.
So the 10-year thing kind of came later.
No, like that was part of it. Like it was part of it. But in the face, I'm just saying during that even though I don't want to make it sound like there was no challenge along that way. You know what I mean? Like during that time.
Right. But we talked about, 2008 is pretty much when the economy started tanking. And and I said, well, how did you make it? And you said, I was eating ramen, or I was just happy to make $500 and I would do whatever I could, right, to get to that point.
Here's one thing I give myself credit for. I always believed this. I don't know where I got it from. I just always knew it intuitively. The biggest investment is your time. It's because I had this mindset of a 10-year commitment, I knew any time deferred away from that was not moving me towards that goal. Therefore, what basically happened was the bar of success got to get dropped dramatically. Basically, the priority was you got to work in design, and specifically in typography. Like, as long as you're moving forward in that direction, you're golden. That's what matters. And because the majority of your time is spent working, that's a significant amount of time. So that's why it was a priority to get work in this field during that time. So at least I can continue investing towards that goal. And that's why even like a $500 check, which I laugh now at, I just like whatever. But back then it was a godsend,
Right. So one thing I just want to make sure that we bring up, because I loved this when we did our test, and I love this when we talked about the other day. Yeah. How painting, I said, well, because really you were a painter, and that seems really kind of far away from typography to me until you explained it, and it was about the texture. Can you explain how you were a painter and then you became the typographer, and how that met those same needs?
Yeah, because the question you asked me was, do I paint still? And the answer is no, I haven't painted in like 8 years. It's whatever it's been. It's been a huge amount of time since I painted. And the answer was because the itch that painting served, the type design is serving an itch. So I basically here, I'll do a share screen to explain what I mean by this.
Great.
All right, so load it up. Okay. Got it. Okay, so I pulled up Cezanne, a Cezanne painting, mainly because Cezanne for me was always my inspirational painter. I always loved, and I'll use him as a demo to explain what I mean. So for me, painting fundamentally comes down to relationships of parts of the whole, right? How do the individual pigments of paint, of color, interact with each other and kind of create a cohesive whole? So it's this kind of, you got to look at every individual part and then how those parts relate to the whole. Now, what was interesting about Cezanne particularly was he's following this tradition of painting. And one of the things mainly in question at this point in the post-impressionist era was the question of observation, perception. And how does representation and reality get represented pulled together? There's a tension in that. There's always been that tension of reality and representation, right? Because a painting is not reality; it's a representation of it, And the tradition before, especially with the Impressionists, was starting the challenge was this idea of like the academic painting, right? This is a very top-down model of what is the right way to paint to represent reality and the models of ideas of thinking of that. The Impressionists started challenging that in terms of what could be painted in what context and what methodology, specifically the idea of exposing the materiality of how things are made, right? Post-Impressionism, in this case, Cezanne, kind of took that idea and pushed it even further as a way of exploring. And what I love about it is that Cezanne actually doesn't even resolve his conflicts. He has his tensions in his paintings of things that are unresolved, because he's dealing with right now one of the basic issues of observation is that a painting is a singular image, yet our eyes look at two images at once, right? We have a left eye and a right eye, and we have to use both pieces of information together to create the image of what we're seeing. So inherently, there's actually a certain falsity in the illusion of one painting, of one still image representing reality. That's why in his paintings, there's a certain flatness happening. His solution to that crisis was a certain flattening of space and focusing on the modularness of color to how the space speak of those relationships and how those parts play with each other. And for me, I found that but it's unresolved. It took the next generation of painters to take that idea, and where's where Cubism comes and all the other modernist painting models come from. That's what I love about it. It's like this clearly thinking of intentionality of space and relationships and how parts relate to other parts. So it's very much both this very specific focus and this very broad sensibility at the same time. And that's what type design does for me too.
Because in type design, you have the negative space and the positive space. And you talked about this the other day. It's about creating words and creating these combinations of these letters, not necessarily, you really do have to think of it as all the parts, how they work together as a whole, right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Here, I'll take this chance to talk about the Google Font SWAT team project.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
Yes. So let's see. I'm going to pull up. Let's see. Okay. Give me a second. Where are you? Okay. So
this is new stuff. We didn't get to look at this slide the other day. Yay.
Yeah. Because I think these slides actually do a better job explaining what's going on. Okay. So what happened was Google Fonts, everyone knows it. And here, I'll turn off my share for a second, and then I'll switch back on when I'm ready to talk about the project. So Google Fonts is one of the most popular APIs of Google's basic services, right? Because fonts are everywhere. It makes up the web, right? And they offer a great service, which is basically you want to use fonts for the websites, and you want to make it very easy and straightforward to do. They offer that service. Here was the downside. The problem was because they wanted to scale really rapidly, it was quite frankly really janky production. Like it was just mass scale. Don't worry about quality. Just make a lot of stuff, get it out the door. The team behind the Google Fonts knew that, but they made a conscious decision of strategy to do that. Now that they reached a certain level of scale, they've circled back. And last summer, I was selected as a part of a group of international type designers in different countries, Europe, India, Russia, Vietnam. We're all brought together in New York for a week-long conference. And we basically decided as a group, like the assignment was, how can we improve Google Fonts based on the allocation of time? We were being hired for 3 months, each of us. And they were saying, okay, what can you guys do in 3 months to improve the collection massively? And what we mean by improvement, quite frankly. There was a whole lot of debates and conversations within the group. It was a really fantastic team. It was led by David Crossland, who is part of Google now. And the whole team of, as I talked in the last session we did, I showed some of the work the other team members did. Basically, we came to the conclusion, at least the way, there were a bunch of directions. One was language support. Basically, because a lot of times people would try to use Google Fonts and it didn't support their script, like the language they used, even in just the Latin alphabet, basically. And they got hosed because of that. They couldn't use the font. There's that side. But the basic problem we had was, wait a minute, if you just like take janky fonts and just extend the language support, is that really worth our time? Is that worth really? Because the other position, and we pushed really hard as a team, was there's fundamentals of type design that if we apply this will significantly improve the quality of Google Fonts. Because as the basic problem is that these were not experts who produced the work most of the time.
Right.
And there's a base of knowledge that we've cultivated that we are given the platform to execute on. This is not very glamorous work. I'll explain in a minute when I go over my slides, but it's not glamorous work, but it has compounding effects. A lot of little decisions have a huge effect. So if you don't mind, I can show you on the screen now.
So how many people were asked? How many people were part of the team?
It was 5 of us. I think 5 designers and 2 engineers.
Okay. So then you come together for a week and you had incredible conversations, and then you go back to your home countries. Yeah. You just go to your house.
I was in New York. Yeah,
right?
I was in my studio.
Right. Yes. Go back to your studio and then you start working.
That's correct.
And how did you decide? So I think you're going to pull up how you decided on who worked on what.
Well, there were a couple of decisions. One was, first we made a decision of looking at, because the big issue is this is open source. This is all open source stuff. It was very educational because you learned that there's a certain, technically you can use any open source font and do whatever you want with it, right? That's the basic idea. However, there is an idea of like authorship. There's still authorship in open source stuff. So you can grab whatever open source font you want, but if you don't really have the blessings of the author who originated it, you don't get to do the definitive new edition of it. This is actually a very interesting idea. So what had to first happen was we had to pick out the ones that we could access the authors and get their blessings to even review them. Then we cross-reference that to popularity, basically who has all this information about who's using the fonts, and we basically the most, because we want to be most effective, right? We want the most used fonts. So we cross-reference those 2 data points and put them together. So from there, it came down to the group kind of review the collections, and the big part basically was like whoever called it got it, and that's actually really important because it's like who. Here, I'll show you. So here, now I'll show up my share screen to explain. Let's see. Where are you? Okay. So one of the fonts that I selected was Quicksand. And when I saw this, you know what's so funny? It was funny. Like I saw it and I had an instantaneous like, yes, I see what it's trying to do. It's kind of hilarious, like from my perspective on some aspects of it. But I see what it's trying to do and I see its potential. If I just take this and just like polish it up, it's going to be a whole nother level of design, in my opinion. So I just called it. That's basically that was the conclusion of it. And each team member did that basically. So that's actually really important because you need that kind of passion behind it to push you. Because you only got 3 weeks to do it. So you've got 3 weeks to try to hit these typefaces as aggressively as you can. And we did a two-pronged strategy. One was accent character support up to Beminese. So these languages all go up to Eastern European, Turkish, and Vietnam, which is pretty much the most advanced level of Latin support you can do as a baseline. So that's a pretty large character set. I think that's like 750 characters.
Wow.
Something like that per style. So because you have multiple styles, this multiplies relatively quickly.
And styles meaning like light, bold, right? Yes. Weights, right?
Correct. Yes, okay. Weights and italics, if that's included too, which then can double compound things. So there's that prong of the attack. The other one is these fundamental design principles. So here's Quicksand, the original, when I saw it. One of the first things that immediately drew to me was a couple of parts. Part one was like how tracked out it was. It's like you're in a sandstorm and it's like letters are being blown all away from each other, which is a cool effect, but I knew it limited usage, because also the big problem, I know the letter spacing in CSS, it's very coarse. It's like it just jumps so quickly. You don't have the same kind of finesse in your letter spacing abilities you do in print technology, in the print world, than you do in web. So it kind of inherently limits how you can use this. I'm of the opinion you're better off taking a normal space typeface and track it out if you want to get this effect versus the other way. Like you'll have less error of problems that way.
What was something else that you saw that you thought?
There's a whole bunch. Okay. So here, let me roll up. So this was the before, and then let me pull up the after. I think it's 20. Yeah, come on. Find you. Wait.
Wow.
There it is.
Spacing really helps because again, we actually don't read individual letters. We actually read the shape of the word. And so they did a study at Cornell where you can actually, if your first letter and the last letter are correct, you can actually read it even if it's all jumbled up. You can still read. It's slower, but you can still read the word.
Yeah, because that's what the human eye does. It takes approximations and kind of smashes it all together. It's kind of amazing. It's really kind of amazing.
It is.
Of the human body, human mind and eye that it can do that.
But you also seem like you extended the counters in a lot of spaces so that it was easier to see, because the F, when you would get into that black or the extra bold or whatever before, it was really falling apart. So you extended some of those, the letter forms, and then made it so that the counters were a little bit bigger, more open.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going. There's a lot of fundamentals. So here, I'll switch back to the original to switch the show. So the first thing that happened was, yeah, obviously there's a general spacing, but here's a big thing too. If you look at this is a phenomenon of the human eye. When you look at the lightweight in this example, you see how much bigger that letter M looks, for example, compared to the M in the bold.
Yeah.
It's because the human eye is using this negative space around a letter to infer its like relative size. So if the typeface is the same X height and you don't make compensations for that, the bolds feel smaller. Like basically your eye, it creates a kind of a smaller X height effectively. So sometimes you want that intentionally, but I felt like the jump here is too dramatic. Like it's like two different typefaces basically. It's like the light's like one voice and the bold is a totally different voice for projects. And especially combine that with there's a common theme in these projects, which was contrast. The idea like the light, when you have a lighter weight, you have less contrast between the thicks and thins, like the thinnest part of the stroke and the heaviest part of the stroke. I'll use the A actually. The A is a good example. So if you look at where the round strokes connect with the straight stroke, I wonder if I can zoom into demo. Low res, but hey, okay. It's not the best. Some contrast should exist there, but it's okay. But when you get down to the heavyweight, it just blobs. Basically, it's just gunk. It's called dipping in chocolate. That's the phenomenon we talk about. Like you took the letter, you dipped it in chocolate, and if everything gains weight at the same momentum, the same amount, it just blobs up everything. It creates. It's almost like if you think in musical terms, it makes it like a dull note. Like the note's not. It's not the right ping of a note. It's not like tuned right, basically. So there are spacing considerations and contrast considerations. So what ends up happening is but I also knew this was kind of meant for display. It's kind of a display. That's why I chose for a relatively tight spacing. So that basically the space between the letters is smaller than the space inside the counters.
And display, just for anybody who's brand new, display would be not for body text, correct?
Yeah, as a default. I mean, you could do strategies to make this work at a smaller setting, but it's kind of I kind of saw its potential mainly in like a 16 point up kind of environment. So what we can see, one note you can tell is kind of looking at M, for example. Do you notice how like not blobby it feels anymore? Like it doesn't have that same kind of effect. It kind of it snaps in, mainly because of where thick strokes connect with the lighter strokes. It snaps into the right amount. Let's see, and then just also proportions too, like how the T was drawn. I just kind of like give it more. It doesn't feel so top heavy, like all over the place. And the S was a big one. S's are actually very, very challenging to draw. And if I show the demo, so the S's, especially in the bold weight, you have a problem when you add contrast like way to a S. Where does the priority go? Like which part is the most important part of the stroke, and which one's secondary and tertiary? Like what is the order of importance? Usually, you want the spine to be the heaviest, and then you kind of work backwards based on that. Also, just proportionally, let's put it this way. It's like the top, like the S's, the light S's are just basically, again, it's the same phenomenon on the N and the M. They seem bigger. Like they seem like they take up more space in the bolder version. Versus in addition, I did the revisions. I regularized them more together so that they feel like the same size. Like they're gaining weight, but they're also the same letter. That's the same size.
Yeah, much, much better there.
Yeah. So that's the example. And some other like more in like inside. This is a very dramatic change up, but more nuanced points. This is actually one of my favorite demos. This is like fun type design nerd action all the way. It's the peso currency. So the peso is a version where you have two horizontal strokes across the P. The top example is what happens if you don't do any optical corrections to compensate for that. What ends up happening is there's too much black and not enough white in the sacred ground space. So it just looks blobbed up. And this was set in any kind of medium setting. It's not going to work. It's not going to be that effective. So I have here basically on the top, we see the cross section, and then kind of the bars pulled to the side to show you what's going on there. Below is what the adjustments I did. I kind of create like these barbell effects.
Mm-hmm.
This is a trick type designers do when they have complicated forms like this and heavier weights. The human eye doesn't really care, as you said about like reading words and sentences. It really doesn't care what's in the middle as long as the totality kind of hits what you're expecting. So you can remove some weight from the middle parts of the stroke, or those horizontal strokes, get some white in that counter, and still be able to read it as a peso and have it harmonize really well. And then I have an overlay to the right to show what got changed between the two.
Yeah, huge difference. And the counters just opening up that space, having more contrast between the negative and the positive space allows you to understand what that is.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because you would only notice if I pointed it out to you and had this super large. Like in any kind of setting in text, it's most likely you would never even notice it, which is fun. That's why that's what I love about type design. You do these tricks and like no one even notices it. It's fun. Some other notes about also about like extended character sets. So working with non-extended Latin. Here's an example. These are ogoneks. So this is used in Polish, I believe. And the examples in the middle are the before. Examples on the left side are my adjustments, and then the right is the overlay. So traditionally, an ogonek should come from the end of a stroke. It's like as if you were drawing with a pen, and at the end of the stroke, that needs to hook over. So if it feels too abrupt, this is what you can't just snap it on, especially to a rounded letter, like a terminal with a rounded stroke. You actually have to draw it in a way that feels somewhat natural in some way, coming up the stroke. And it's especially true in like lowercase e. Like it has to be like part of the upper stroke of the e and then come back down again to feel like a proper ogonek in this case. So this is some examples of like before and after adjustments between the two.
Again, that's knowing about how people write it. And I don't know if you ever had done work before. I mean, clearly when you're designing type, you're designing these parts, but you have to really be able to be passionate about other people and how they use these letter forms or how these were created in the beginning to be able to do something like this that is more, because granted, after you tell me this, the E that they originally came up with looks ludicrous, because why would you pull this from the middle of the E, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, so that's the thing. It's like there's like this hidden knowledge that you have to gain. And that's, again, this is why I like this project. And I really believe in terms of these fundamental, like kind of these type design fundamentals. This is not really glamorous work, because like most type designers are like, oh, you want to do your own creative vision and whatnot. But I believe in the fundamentals, that if you apply the fundamentals, they have a huge effect. And I think these are great examples of it. I'll close with with the last example, which is like some simple things like an @ and a sterling symbol, and or Libra, one or the other. Anyways, basically the example on the left is the original, the middle is the adjustment, and the overlay between the two of them. So the original, if you notice, like it's an italic, right? It's supposed to be italicized, but doesn't feel italicized properly. And you can look especially in like how the outer stroke of the curl in the @ sign, it just doesn't feel comfortable. Right. Actually, in my eye, I can actually see them. It's kind of like the outer strokes are going in one momentum, and the inner strokes are not matching. They're actually a little flat, like they're almost like a diamond shape, like this. So in my eyes, so my adjustments kind of get it to feel like more like a continuous stroke. You want to kind of create some momentum and energy inside that symbol.
But it feels like it's the same energy, both the inside and the outside.
Yeah, exactly. And then the sterling is another example where basically I thought the original was like a little too simple. Like considering the other moves and the profile of this design, it's kind of warm and friendly, and that sterling is just so blunt. It's just like jerk, like just like that main spine stroke is just so straight. And I'm like, we got to do something with it. Like we got to that's the thing. I tell my students when they do type design, like type design is not just the letters. It's not just A to Z, upper and lower case. It's all this other stuff. It totally counts, and it actually affects the flavor of your type design. Even though it may only show up in one in particular context, these are actually opportunities to change the flavor of your typeface. And you have a certain soul and spirit you're trying to convey across not just these, the basic character set, but a much larger symbol symbols and numerals and whatnot, that you want to carry that through as much as you can. So here's an example where I just added a little wiggle into that spine to give some flavor into that bad boy. So that's just, I kind of like as an example of that.
I love that. That's great. And that's really good to know about the spirit and the soul, because it is when we're, as a designer, when I'm choosing type, if I choose one typeface versus another, we totally get it. It says something else. But even in that characteristic of it not fitting as a whole, you know, each piece has to fit within that family of that typeface. And you're absolutely right. It did feel way abrupt. And the other was a little bit more lighter and it is a little bit more fun and free flowing instead of, so it was like you had this one kid who just always followed the rules and then never had any fun, you know, the first Sterling sign.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was the main project, you know, and I think that the work done with the other team members were also again, they were really focused on fundamentals, but I think they did a great job. So some quick examples was my team member Kalabi. He worked on I don't have my notes on me right now, so I don't remember which typeface this is, but here's it before. Whoops, hey, come back here. Oh no, I don't have the other slide actually, or do I? Yep, there it is. Great. And that's the after. So some really fundamental, just like curve, this contrast, and just like curve momentums, and some proportion adjustments, just to kind of, again, to kind of snap it in, to kind of tighten it up and get some snappiness into it.
And it was about the joining of the strokes, right? Again,
Yeah.
Just similar to quicksand, making those a little bit more sharper so that it feeds in. I guess those are tiny little things, but they make a huge difference as you place them all together. And so we talked about the other day, and I can't remember what that symbol is, but it's like a double S or something.
Oh, the Gazette, yes.
Yeah. Clearly, I don't know what that's called, but that was a huge difference because it had like a descender before.
Yes. Years before? Yeah. Yeah, a whole bunch of things. Like also notice how the curves on the top are being, like notice this top part of this curve and compare that to the other one. Notice how much, it just feels like its own, it's a bit, a constant metaphor I use and thinking about type is like, does it own its space? Like type exists in a box, it exists in a certain space, right? Does it own its space, or is it just kind of like slumping there and just like hanging out, you know, in a not a very active way? So the main
it definitely feels squished in this one. It doesn't feel like, it feels like it's trying to fade into the background instead of being its own. Yeah, much better.
Yeah, because it just kind of fills its space much more effectively.
Yeah,
you know? That's the kind of things we're looking for as type designers. Where these kind of, a big theme is like intentionality. You know, I think that's a big theme I talk about a lot when I teach people type design or type in general. It's what's the intention. And normally, like what I find amazing in human beings is that you can create these artifacts that have intention, and someone can perceive that independently. I find that's kind of amazing. I've always seen that. I've always noticed that's been the case. And I think these kind of projects that show that, demonstrate that level of intentionality is super rewarding, I think. Not very sexy, but I think very rewarding, ultimately. That's what design should do, is serve people.
Jackson, sorry. I don't know. People have been walking, and he just starts growling. Like, I don't know. Maybe he didn't trust that person. Sorry.
Or
Keep
he doesn't
going.
like fonts. I don't know.
No, he's fine with fonts. It was the person walking. So one of this one, I think that was is that there are, maybe in the beginning, I think this is Pacifico, in the beginning, there are issues with readability or legibility of certain letters. The M or the W reads almost as an M, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's a certain, some ambiguities in some letter forms, how it connects with the other letter forms around it. There's some serious challenges in making script typefaces. It's very difficult.
Right.
Especially this is called a semi-connected script. So meaning some letters connect and some don't. Those are actually the most complicated scripts that produce as typefaces. So it's very challenging.
But before, when they connected, it put too much space in between. The counter was too big in between those two, or the counter space was too big between the W and the S.
Yeah.
And so switching it so that it's not connected made it so much more of a flow. It's a quicker read visually for a person. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example. Like they basically a way a type designer would look at this is looking at pairs of three. So in this case, the E, the W, and the S. We would look at those as a pair, of 3 and ask the question, is the W sitting in the middle comfortably, or is it leaning too much to the E?
It likes the E better than the S.
Exactly. Just, the S smells, and it wants to go to the E. That's how we would look at spacing as a type designer. And Jock, who worked on the project, made adjustments based on making the W wider and making it not connect, for example. Those 2 decisions, if you look at that pair, the W feels like it's sitting comfortably between the 2, the E and the S.
Absolutely.
Yeah, precisely. So I think that's another great example of like these subtle differences have a huge compounding effect to make the project more successful.
So is it hard to work with the other parts of the language that are the symbols, characters that we don't normally use in our alphabet? Is that harder for you, or is it easier because you aren't coming in with some of the same, misconceptions because you've used it your whole life?
It's a little tricky. I mean, only because usually, for example, the Ogonek, right? Like you had to know it had a calligraphic source, and you had to then extrapolate based on that. So it's actually, usually you get in trouble because you'll just like guesstimate, but there might be kind of a cultural knowledge that you have to gain. This is why there's a certain level of linguistics in type design. Like if you don't have that knowledge, you're really kind of shooting in the dark. And a great example of that was we did Vietnamese support on these projects, and I don't know Vietnamese. I never designed for those extended characters. I never did extension towards that language, that script that uses Latin. So there are certain forms, like it's called the horn, which are, if you look at the U, you see these U's with this hook on the side coming out?
Yeah, it's like a coffee mug.
Yeah, it's like a little mug,
handle.
Exactly. Yeah, and the O, for example, that's called a horn accent. And then there's the hook, which is like this, looks like a question mark a little bit.
Yeah.
Like in the A. Yeah. How heavy should they be? What proportion should they be? How should they relate to the other accent characters in the script? I didn't know. So we had Young, who was a Vietnamese designer, who was on the team explicitly to help us out with that project. And she would jump in. This is one of the projects I worked on, Maven Pro. There's an edition of it on Google Fonts, and it had enough popularity to justify improving it. So she helped me out with the support of it. And let's see. Okay. So here's the before, like a draft, when I gave her a draft to work with. And this is the after. So if you look at the horn, for example, notice the horn went from, on the O, from the side to basically like a calic on the top.
Yeah.
Right? I'd done for probably most likely for spacing reasons.
And the little question marks seem to get a little bit smaller.
It's smaller, and its proportions are different, treated differently. And it's considered, it's actually, especially when you look at it combined with like the circumflex, for example. Yeah, is it Karen or circumflex?
That's a Karen, isn't it?
Oh,
well, Karen. Whatever. I don't know.
Wait, circumflex, Karen. Yes, you're correct. Sorry, it's a Karen. You can notice it's actually smaller. It's slightly smaller. So it's a priority decision that which one matters more, and this one matters second.
Well, that's really important that you guys had other people from those languages to come and do that support. How often would you meet in that 3-month kind of period? And clearly it's online, right?
Yeah, it's all online. I mean, after the first week, where we had two week-long meetings in the beginning of the project and the end. The beginning was when we assessed the scope, and then the end was just reviewing what we did and last-minute reviews. Young was part of the project the whole way through. And it was mostly online. So what would happen is she was doing her projects, working on that, and then we would basically ping her when we wanted to have a conversation with her or what we're doing, and she would make her assessments. Sometimes she would jump in and do the work, and then I would continue on that, or she would give me advisement, for example, with me, and then I would continue forward based on that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings me into this Type Thursday. So I want to make sure we have 10 minutes left. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Yeah.
But how much and I want to make sure we do font tribute. We talk about that as well. But so you have these people, you're working alone, but then you are coming together to get out of your head, because sometimes it's all about you. And the whole the reason Type Thursday started was because you were sitting alone. Now you need some feedback. You wanted critical feedback and analysis, because sometimes we looked at something too long. And it started just with you and a couple friends going to a bar, right?
Yes, indeed. I think we actually talked about this a little bit off, like before we signed on today, this morning, where, for most people after graduation, they kind of stop learning, right? They kind of just, that's it. Like, they don't ever read a book afterwards. And it's kind of madness from my perspective, because, as I said in the beginning, it's like design is not just 9-to-5 job that you go to school once. It's a discipline that you have to constantly keep training and developing yourself. So originally Type Thursday was, as you said in a great summary, a place for me to show work in progress, especially for self-initiated work, where I didn't have the imperatives of client relationships that had to produce the work. It would always push me every month to produce something that was my own, and then show it to my type design crew and get their feedback and catch up and all that great stuff. So we started, if I can share the screen again, it started just like at a bar. There's like 5 of us and whatever. And it would be so dark in the bar, we would have to constantly use our cell phones as flashlights. As you can see here, like we see a type designer who works at Monotype now, Juan, he has his cell phone out, flashlighting, and I would constantly have my phone. It's the green phone there. He would put it on top of the beer glass and put it on, and then it would create like a lamp effect. It was great. I kind of miss those days a little.
That's great.
It's very scrappy. It's a very scrappy improvising.
But it's about passion, right? Yeah. It's that you guys were so passionate about, and you're coming in and you just need real feedback. And so I guess that's another thing that what it seems like, because I haven't ever been able to experience one, but it seems like Type Thursday is you're coming in and you're not just wanting praise. It's real critique of, and it's not just type designers, right? It's type users like me, designers, and then type people who are creating, and then some people who are just learning more, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. So here's the thing, like, there's a reason that I call those the show, like the look at me, I'm special presentations. No, we don't do that. Because the problem with type design is it doesn't work that way. It's such a long, arduous process of development. And it's kind of built into our culture. Like, we have a thing called proofs, where we have these kind of incrementally improving, we do more and more letters, right? Mm-hmm. We start with a very base level letters to make some decisions, and we expand out based on that. Along the way, it's inherently known these are incomplete. So therefore, what can you show and tell? Like, you can't you can't get proud about it because it's not done yet, and most likely there's going to be gigantic contradictions and conflicts and ambiguities of what you're trying to do. So you might as well, like, why are you going to front like that? There's no value in that. So instead, you just acknowledge up front, hey, this is what's going on. Based on this objective of what I'm trying to do, I think these things are working about it. I like these aspects of it. I think it's promising. I see potential in that, but there's also flaws. I'm struggling with this. That's put on the table. That just came from just experiences critiquing, where I just noticed most people can't critique. They just can't do it. It's a totally different skill set. Because most people, what they'll do is they'll just look at it, and then at best, they'll ask me one question. But they already made their decision. They're just asking the question to kind of get in the mode of starting to make their statements, their fiats of what needs to happen. And it's a lot of times, unless you're trained to critique and how to critique in an effective way, it's basically thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right.
Based on some arbitrary decisions, usually. That's not very useful.
But really, and as we had talked about the other day, it's really, content, but then context. How is this going to be used? And you also said a lot of UX, UI people come to Type Thursdays because they come with a different perspective on how we need this font to work or this typeface to work in this situation.
Yeah. So here's a great example. I know there have been people for example, as you said, you people in UX and product design and whatnot, they come in and they see someone's showing a typeface that's meant for that usage. And then they have actually specific statements. Oh, if you're thinking for that, you're looking for how I would use it. Well, I would consider X, Y, and Z. And I don't see that in the font yet. It's like, say, a certain spacing or certain considerations they didn't even think about because they're not talking to a UX person. Right. It's amazing how much we do our work and we just sit in our caves doing our work and we don't interact with people. And that's what made Type Thursday so interesting, is that it brought in a large amount of people who come from their domain expertise. So even have someone who's a lettering person, like a calligraphy lettering person, and someone does a typeface that has some inspiration based on that, they'll give them references to certain sources of knowledge Kind of like I did with the Ogonek discussion, for example, or
absolutely.
You only have that from a certain expertise level versus, or in case example, like Young went to the Vietnamese in the Google Font project where she has expertise. I didn't know what to do, and she came in and gave me the input. But this is now on a public forum that gets shared to everybody.
Yeah. Right, because it is a community, because you can't do everything in a vacuum and it be everything for everybody. And I thought that's a great aspect of Type Thursdays. And so a lot of times type designers are not, or regular designers are not like you and me, where we're a little bit more gregarious. And so this gives them a platform to show where maybe they're more comfortable, but then you kind of create the situation. So I asked you the other day so how does they just come with a jump drive and ready to go? It's not the way it works anymore, right?
Let me walk you through I should walk you through like the evolution, right? Because in the beginning we were at a bar. How could we do that? Right. So it had to be printed out, to the point where I started bringing a lamp to the event, so that we would have proper lighting here in some scenario. It was hilarious. It would be hilarious. I would come with a lamp out of my backpack and then an extension cord to connect it from the outlet across the bar, and by like this point, this is like I think this is like month 4 at this point. We had gotten so big that we were taking over bars. It was like 30 people at the bar. It was madness. There was no way we couldn't even keep everyone coordinated together to talk about the project. And then it's Brooklyn in New York. So eventually people would be like, hey, what's going on? What's all this big crowd about? We would say, what's going on? And they'd be like, oh, we're graphic designers. This is really cool. We say, come on in to hang out. So what ended up happening was, and this is, by the way, like as we moved to another venue, as we got bigger and bigger, and as we held up pretty long with a print version. Eventually we started getting projectors. So you would eventually you would submit a PDF. You would show the PDF so that people could see. We basically just kept growing and growing and growing. And eventually we got to like a point we curated an exhibition. We had a party bus that bussed everybody to the exhibition. That's cool. Yeah, it's madness. And now finally, like at the first, and we're at now, where it's very formal, it's pretty large. It's like this is at Google. We were at Google in December, at New York, and we have a projector set up, very large on a stage. We have a critique lead who leads a conversation with the presenter, and it's surprisingly held up the format really well in the face of all this growth, and that's been a really promising thing. And it's a limited time they have to present, right? So that you can get more than one person a night done. Oh, huge. You have to. You could spend forever on a critique. Right. Usually it's 15 minutes. 5 minutes is a dialogue with the critique lead where they're going to ask the questions that I pointed out. Like basically like, what are you working on? What's the context? Who are you? What are you trying to achieve with this? What's working based on what you're saying? And what are you struggling with? What do you need improvement on? And then after that dialogue's completed, it's open up to the audience. And then the audience has 10 minutes. They go up to the mic, and they make their statements. And what's very fascinating from I'm talking to people who've had critique done, when they work past it usually happens at first people are a little nervous, especially at this scale. They get a little woo about it. But then they get really enthusiastic when they see how friendly and positive the overall vibe is. But very useful too, because what ends up happening is when someone makes a statement, when someone says a statement that usually a lot of other people were thinking, and they're kind of the representative of that statement, there's a certain buzz. Like you could feel a certain buzz in the room, and people shaking, like nodding their heads, like yeah. And people who've been critiqued have shared with me that they've noticed that, like, oh wow, like this guy just said that, and like the whole room just agreed to it. Basically, I should consider that. I should look into that. So it kind of creates like this great mix of democracy, right? Contribution democracy of a community together, but also helping you develop and cultivate your ability at the same time in a very positive way, constructive way. So let's talk about it from the audience perspective. So how does somebody come? So you guys announce it and then they just show up, and is it $10? Is it $18? Is there a membership fee? Yeah. Well, great question. So what we do is it's all online. Basically, follow us on our social media networks. We have an Eventbrite page for each chapter because we have chapters in New York, San Francisco, and LA. And let's see. Yeah, San Francisco just happened. It was this Thursday. And what you do is you sign up on Eventbrite. And we have 3 models. We have an early bird RSVP, which is, let's see, an early bird RSVP that's for free. Then when that sells out, or basically before either sells out or 2 weeks before the event, there's a $12 ticket And then there's a last minute $25 ticket and show up. So it allows us to be sustainable to pay for the expenses of the event, but also always be opening and making sure we're never letting cost be a stopper for people to get involved and engage with the project.
And so you're not gonna, you get something to drink, right? You have wine or water, right? We talked about
that's why I think like we're very focused on hospitality, very huge. I think a very big thing that makes Type Thursday unique is it's one of those things that's like you would never notice unless you actually went to it, which is we're super focused on making sure people feel welcomed. And there are so many subtle steps that do that. One is very simple, which is having nice food and drinks. Right. So for in the past, like basically what I would do is I'd pay the tab of the bar, for example. When we used to be at the bar, or now in more formalized situations, we have water and beer and wine and make it a very social event. But also we have a team now of volunteers that are very coordinated and make sure that, for example, when you enter the space, you ever notice when you go to an event, you feel that kind of awkwardness, anxiety when you first walk in, where you don't know what's going on and you don't know where to go. We have volunteers who welcome welcome you and tell you, hey, welcome to Type Thursday. Are you showing work today? They say yes or no, whatever. Then you say, great. Well, hey, listen, here's the coat check over here. Food and drinks are over here. And we're going to start critique at 8 o'clock, for example.
Oh, great.
Yeah, really subtle, really simple stuff. And then basically, and then also what you do, we have volunteers who are specifically tasked to, if someone wallflowers, kind of like as they're drinking, goes to the corner of the room, they're instructed to go talk to them. Just go talk to them and find out what they're interested in and introduce them to someone who is interested in the same thing.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's very simple, but very effective.
So what about sponsors? Because I noticed that a lot of times you have sponsors, like Adobe Typekit was a sponsor. And how does that work? And you have 3 locations, right? You have LA, you have New York, and you have San Francisco.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So LA is actually opening in March. Its first event is March 2nd.
Cool.
New York, yeah. And so the sponsorship business. So we got a couple things. One is we support the type industry by having what's called a Foundry sponsor. That's for free. It's in kind. What basically the deal is, we as a gift to people showing up, Type Foundries have swag items. We give them swag items. So it helps space. So when you come to an event, you usually get a swag item with you from that sponsor when you attend. So it helps the foundries out, getting their work out, and it's a nice present to encourage people to come. It was a very effective strategy in the beginning to help drive interest and to ensure people were going to show up. Because you're in New York City, especially, like you got to pull something in here to get people to show up on a Thursday. So the swag was a way to pull it off. But that's really straightforward.
So is getting those, like, so say New York, was that like all you had to get with people and get sponsors? Because that's like a full-time job.
Are you kidding, Diane? Of course. I mean, listen, I have a team now. God bless them. Really, like it's impossible. Like it's grown too much. Like it's no way. Like there's a team in San Francisco. It's a fantastic team in San Francisco. A huge, fantastic team in LA, and New York has a team now too. But in the beginning, it was just me. And what ended up happening was I was running like a madman, doing everything you're saying, hosting the event, being the critique lead, being the MC, like doing everything for like the first 8 months of the event, of the project, basically.
And that's a ton, and you're working. So it's not like you're not getting paid for this. No. Right. Yeah.
No one's getting paid. But what ended up happening was people who were bought into the vision. They saw what we were doing, and they saw me just basically like you lead by example. So if you're killing yourself, and then you go to someone, the first person who joined the team was a great friend of mine, Julie Thompson, who's a photographer, and I reached out to her when we got our first sponsor, Dribbble. Dribbble was one of our first sponsors, and I said, "Hey, Dribble's coming to sponsor us. Would you be interested in photographing the event?" And she's like, "Absolutely, Tom, I'm there." So she saw me hustling and she backed up and she saw and basically when you win, more people want to join you. So as you're pushing yourself and then always pushing yourself really hard, people join you on the project. And when it starts with one person, becomes 2, then 5. So now a team of I think our team is now like 20 people. It's kind of amazing.
So how did it go? Can you switch off back so we can see your face?
Of course.
So how did it go back from New York and then to San Francisco? Like, how did that get started? Was it Type at Cooper or Type San Francisco really was started a driving force, or did like Rachel, was she Elnar with Type Ed, was she a driving force and she had come and experienced it or saw what you were doing online and said, hey, can we tap into this? How did that happen?
So what happened was a former mentor, a mentor of mine in type design, Del Worthington of Dell's Fonts. He basically been watching what I'm doing in New York, and he saw the success coming out of it. And he reached out to me and he said, hey, Tom, would you consider opening a chapter in San Francisco? I'd be interested in leading that. I was like, absolutely. So let's get started. So that's it. It's really how it went down. And then Rachel, great person. I'm glad you know her. And she was basically, a colleague of mine recommended her. She said, you need to talk to her. This is right up her alley. She'd be a great person for this team. I contacted her. We had a conversation, and our missions line up very clearly, and it just comes together. It's kind of amazing. It's in some ways it's so simple, but also a very big part of it was, here's a very big part, is you got to lead first. Like, you got to lead. Like, when you're making something this is out of nothing. There is no, like, out of thin air, that's all it came out of. It's fundamentally from deep commitment to relationships to people. You know, and always investing in people. A big thing, and it started mainly with getting New York to a certain level, and then people started backing it up to start other chapters. Because what I would do would be things like, after Type Thursday events, I would take out people who got critiqued. I would take them out to coffee. I'd reach out to them like, hey, I want to take out the coffee. You know, I would just spend an afternoon with them, get a coffee with them, and talk to them. You know, find out what they go. Just became friends basically with a lot of them, and they just really appreciate that kind of investment in them. It's a big thing. When you invest in others, it gets paid back to you, but not immediately. That's kind of the key. And that's the part people get tripped up on. They're too focused on short-term reward instead of like a long-term investment. But you're a long-term,
you're a long-term guy. So it's, which is great, but it is really unique. A lot of people don't have that mentality. They're like, well, what can it do for me right now? And not saying, hey, this is going to really pay off in 10 years, or this is going to pay off. Because sometimes it gets hard. And I know when you're building this, did you keep like really good notes and, hey, this really worked? Or when somebody wanted to open, when Del wanted to open a chapter in San Francisco, did you send them anything like, here's how we did it, here's kind of the structure?
Yeah. Well, here's a big thing too, as you grow, there's growing pains. Like you're asking actually two questions, Diane. Like, one is the statement about invest long-term versus short-term. Totally natural. In fact, actually, that's the bit. Before you can lead others, you got to lead yourself. And fundamentally, that comes down to coming to that conclusion. Now, ideally, the best answer is you've resolved your short-term issues, so then you can think long-term. You know, I don't know, man. Like you can do both ways. You can either get your short-term issues resolved so you can focus long-term, or you can be like me and you just choose to suffer and you just will your way through it and just say, I believe I can do this, and then just like make it happen, basically. I can't really see much about it because that's the truth of the matter.
To me, that's a very visionary way of thinking, because you have a very clear vision of what it could be with time and effort and work and people, right? And you knew what the value would bring to the community as type designers, as regular designers, as UX UI. You knew what that would bring if people just came enough, right?
Sort of. I mean, I think fundamentally, here's what I did know. I believed in people. Right. I believe in investing in people. That's what I knew. Now, Type Thursday, would it succeed? Would it become what it is and what it's going to be in the future? I didn't know. I didn't know. I had no idea it was going to go past like 10 people in a room. Like there was at one point where like, I'm used to like, it was success when 5 people came or 10 people. It was like, oh my God, 10 people came. You know what I mean? Like,
but I guess maybe you didn't know it would become this, but now that it's like you're able to grow your dream or the vision as it continues to grow, but you also knew what nugget to chew on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Well, basically just you get wins. I mean, the metric is, does things move forward? You know, that's kind of the key. So for example, if you're making a pitch for sponsorship and you get the sponsorship, you did something right.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch, like that's like a whole different conversation. Like that's called like real nitty-gritty hustle moves that it's like a separate conversation in itself. But that's the metric. The metric of success is, do things move forward? Do you get the result you were going for? And does the wheels of movement start going in your way? And but along the way is that usually when that happens, there's also like a whole new set of problems. So like when Delph came in, yeah, I had to document what I did. Like versus I was just doing stuff on the fly, I had to document it. And then when Rachel joined on, there were all these ambiguities that came up because there was growth since Delph came, for example, that Rachel had to get caught up with, and we didn't have it documented. So then it was like a scramble to get that together. And if we're gonna, and then as we continue to grow Type Thursday, I expect if we get more chapters involved, this is going to continue as we go. And that's part of that's the challenge, but that's part of the fun of it from my perspective. And that's a big thing. I will say one thing. I do, and I coach and mentor other designers. A huge thing I say is designers have a huge problem with conflict, right? And here's the thing. No one likes conflict. It sucks. However, there's a choice you can make. You can either say like, I don't like this, I want to avoid it, or you can say there's an opportunity to learn. There's an opportunity to grow. If there's no conflict, then there's no growth. It's just that simple. Like you're not going to win. Like you win by going through the conflict, and I don't mean necessarily always like hard, nasty methods. Right. But it does mean a certain kind of encouragement and a certain kind of exuberance to face the challenge of the day. Right. If I could say that in any other way. Because that's
but it's growth. Yeah. But growth hurts, right?
Of course it does.
And Rachel's here now, actually.
Yes.
So
hey, Rachel, what's up?
But I think that people, from the outside, they think that it's like, oh my gosh, glorious, right? But there's a ton of work that goes into it, and to make it seem so welcoming and warm and very actually learning. There's a ton of learning going on Type Thursdays. There was a ton of work that came from that, and a ton of experiences and missteps and miscommunications or conflict, like you're saying. And we do hate conflict. I don't know. I guess lawyers might like conflict. Those would be the only people I can really seem to think that would really like it, I guess. But
it's funny. If you read the books of most CEOs or founders of any larger movements or events, they always are pro conflict one way or the other. I've noticed that from reading books about that, because it's in the conflict, things grow, things happen, things change. And if that's the and fundamentally, when you're starting a new project, anything that has a larger scope than oneself, right? You're making a proposition to say you're making an ought statement how the world ought to be in some way. The movement between what could be and what is, that change, that's inherently a natural thing of growth and development and conflict that needs to be resolved, because that's the thing. But at least I can tell you from my experience that done the right way, it's super rewarding and amazing. And I think you could do really great things in your life if you choose to go down that path.
So one thing I didn't get to ask you the other day that I wanted to, and after we kept talking, I was like, oh man, I wish I could have asked it, but I guess I get to ask it today.
Yes, you can ask it now.
So, and I can't remember where I wrote this down. Oh, well, so you also do Font Tribute, which is a YouTube channel, which you're doing once a week. You have a video where you're actually, and you're also teaching. You do all these things, and a lot of it actually comes back to education. And you're giving away a lot of absolute amazing free content that really could help people if they take advantage of it. But how do you break up your day? Because you're still designing type and you're still doing work.
Yes.
I mean, you have to eat.
I do. I mean, I'll be quite frank with you. There's costs. Like, you could do a lot in life, but ultimately there's a cost to be made in your decision. For example, I'm not married yet. Like, and there are reasons for that. There in my own personal life, quite frankly, there's like my day starts at 5 a.m. every day. It's a 5 a.m. day, and it just like marches on forever. And there's no one telling me to get up at 5 a.m. I make that choice. But there's so much to be done in the day. There's no other choice. If I ever fall off that horse, I'm hosed. There goes the day, basically. And I have like constant structures. I'm part of these mastermind groups. I have like team meetings with Type Thursday that hold me accountable. Even Type Thursday itself is accountable to me in some way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you build all these structures to force you to have to keep committing and to keep moving forward. Right. So in terms of your question, and that's actually like in terms of like how do you get your stuff done, is you focus on, you admit your weakness as a human being, that you're limited. There are costs to be made. My choice is I'm going to basically probably die young of just from stress or just like overworking myself, but whatever. this is my choice. I made my call and I'm placing my bets in life. Maybe when I'm 50, I get to chill out, but whatever. I'm not there yet. I got 20 years for that to happen. So we'll see what happens. But the point is, like, based on my commitment, okay, well, now I got to build some structures that are going to force me to have to get this stuff done. And that's how it goes. So it's a commitment. Like, on my mastermind call, we have a sponsor. So literally one of my members, we call each other at 6 a.m. and we report what we're doing on the day. I did this yesterday. This was the challenges. What are your thoughts on this? Great. Here's my next steps for the day. And we were doing it for about like 6 months. Every single day we were doing it.
Wow.
It was like it was a death march of execution, but that's how you get these great results. And that's ultimately what it comes down to is like, what game are you playing? Like, what investment are you aiming for? Like, this doesn't make
time.
any. Yeah.
Again, you said it was time is your greatest asset.
Yeah. In terms of like what you want to go with your life, because I'll be just simple enough. Like, committing to 1 hour a day towards a larger project built over time is an incredible amount of time. Most people don't invest 30 minutes to their development, reading a book, anything else. You start small, obviously. And with the wins of career in my life, that I get the privilege of more time to do these things, and that's what I'm saying. So at one point, you only can allocate 1 hour of your time per day towards this. Well, I'm in a privileged position now where I've succeeded professionally, and I can spend more time on it. I still need to hustle, but not as much. And I still got to do the 5 a.m. death march to get this to happen. So it's incredibly, like, again, the example of leading oneself before you lead others in movements and whatnot or projects, you got to hold yourself accountable.
Right.
The to-do list, the wake up calls, you got to, like, most people can't get up at 5 a.m.
Right.
They can't do it. How do you expect to crush it in life? You can't even get up at 5 a.m. Like, it's that simple.
Right. So, but you also seem to keep adding things in, like the Fontribute or Type Thursdays or teaching. Those are all things that maybe have organically happened. And I think they would have happened because I think that you were built to make those things. But that's a choice. And again, you're exactly what you're saying. It's a compromise. It's one thing for this other thing for right now, because this is what I can do. So what made you want to do Fontribute? Let me explain to everybody what Fontribute is.
So Fontribute, okay, here's the thing. So overall, there's plenty of knowledge online and in academics for type 1 classes. Here are the typefaces, old style, transitional, modern, blah, blah, blah. Here are some guidelines, how to use this stuff. Don't do this, do that. All that great stuff. But any kind of advanced consideration of knowledge, like, that's kind of like basic literacy of type. Like, okay, we have that. There's still a lot of ground. Listen, that's still got to be done. But there's a whole group of people that's like plenty out there. I know it from teaching those classes. Right. The next step is more advanced level considerations. Like, how can you discern different typefaces? How can you come to a more nuanced thinking about it? And I just noticed from teaching my students at Queens College that was a constant issue, is that's like, they gain that basic knowledge, but they don't have any of that more advanced way of thinking. So basically, from my classes of teaching at Queens College, I kind of took the model I learned from working, kind of guinea pigging my students, to Fontribute, which is using the power of contrast, comparison. Because it's similar to color theory, like in color painting and color, where a color by itself isolated, you can't really say that much about it. It's very difficult. A white, like an off-white, okay, is that saturated, is desaturated? It is like, it's a tint or a shadow. You need it in context of something else to give you a reference point. So you put up two different typefaces, usually based on a theme or a topic or a concept I want to discuss about type design, typography in some way. And then I just do an analysis. I just play it off the analysis. This is kind of built up my cultivated knowledge of type. So it does a couple of things. One is I use terminology in context. So you get to learn about, oh, when I say spine, I mean this. And when I say a shoulder, I mean that. Right. So because design has a language and typography has a language that, if you just root memorize, you're not going to gain any real mastery of it. You have to hear it in context like any other language. Otherwise, it doesn't do you any good. You'll memorize it for the exam, and then you'll lose it forever afterwards. So there's that. And then there's more advanced considerations. Like, hey, notice that, this S, lowercase s terminal was done this way, but look at the other terminals. They were done that way. How interesting. The designer chose to contrast the difference. like those kind of design considerations. Or, hey, like one of the first posts was these two uppercase letters, like the uppercase letters seem very similar. Like you put them next to each other, like exactly, look very, very similar. But when you go to the lowercase, they're done completely different, and they have a completely different voice as a project because of that. You know, kind of getting this more like kind of that more using this, like this way of thinking, this kind of analytical way of looking at type to help encourage this more broad understanding, artistic consideration of type. So overall, the whole like why Fontribute happened was it's part of that larger project of type design, of not just type design, but Type Thursday, to increase the appreciation and understanding of letter forms around the country, if not the world, eventually. So it basically says Type Thursday is one format of that. Fontribute is another example of that. So those, I see them all tied together under that umbrella.
So when did you start Fontribute and you know, it was fonts and attributes, but we talked about this the other day. It's really a tribute to the font itself and who made it and what decisions they made. And it may be, as a designer, I didn't necessarily look at that because I'm not a type designer, but I use it in my work. But it's really this tribute to these fonts, right?
Yes. So it's been like, I think, a month and a half. So I got like six episodes are up. You know, they're usually about 15 minutes each a pop.
One a week, right?
Yeah, one a week. Yeah.
And I put the link in the chat so people can, and it is in the show notes as well. So it's a YouTube channel. You can actually just look up Thomas Jockin, or you can do Fontribute and it'll pop up.
Yes, exactly. So, okay. So yeah, so it's once a week. What was the other part of the question? I apologize. I just got this.
No, I can't remember either.
It was about the naming, about what.
Oh yeah.
It. Yes. So, yeah, it's kind of it's as you're pointing out, it's attributes, right? That's the way they're talking about it, but it's also a tribute, right? It's literally a tribute to these typefaces. The way the way of it's kind of again, like it's kind of this showing how type designers think about it. How do we consider this materiality? And what are the thought process behind it? So it pays tribute that way by using analysis and discussion to help give a larger understanding and appreciation of the labor and thought and the real intentionality in these projects. And ideally leveling up the mastery of type design of typographers around the world, especially. I think one of the most rewarding things is when people comment like, "Oh, great videos." It's like people are starving for this kind of knowledge because this is a much. It's the tragedy is the people who actually have the domain knowledge to talk about this the most don't have the leverage time to actually allocate to do it. That's the tragedy of it all, you know. And quite frankly, I committed, Rachel. And truth be told, you know, I made a commitment that I'll probably spend a year on this. Fontribute will be like, for a year, I was doing the Type Thursday interviews. We do an interview series on Type Thursday. I've been doing it for a year. Now I trained people to help do the interviews. Stacey Sundar is one of them. She's super fantastic. I think she's actually better than me in the interviews, but it'll be a similar model. I very much believe in this model of cultivating others. So I lead first to show how it can be done. And then I have people underneath who come up the bottom and raise them up to be able to have these discussions and carry on the project so that I can, because like, as you said, there's limited time. And, but by doing these kind of small steps to lead by example and to step up, ideally, I mean, honestly, you know, in terms of like what Type Thursday's larger mission, what is the end goal of this? Ideally is quite frankly to create a new golden age of type. I mean, we hear this, I've heard this termed a lot, but here's the thing. My position is type designers, type fonts are tools to be used by others. So inherently it's relational by default. It cannot exist by itself. It exists within a larger context. As a result, our prosperity is actually based on the success of the people we serve, which are the type users. And that's a very broad amount, that is a huge amount of people. As a result, if they thrive, we thrive. And by thriving, I mean a higher level of appreciation, understanding, and thinking about type and letter forms. So that's my commitment. That's part of this 10, like now we're going past 10 years. That's like 20 to 30,
right?
You know, and then who knows from all these projects, ideally there might be a new generation of type designers to come out of it, or typographers who have a whole new way of thinking and new ways of approaching and understanding type design because of these projects. I mean, it's like the relationship I had with Josh on now a leverage scale, because now instead of just being one-to-one, there might be someone in Indiana, for example, who sees this and gets inspired and goes down this path. And then 20 years from now, they're doing amazing projects of type design I couldn't even imagine.
I guess that was one of the things that I loved. And it was an article where I think you were being interviewed or you were interviewing somebody and talked about how Type now is really, because so many people are able to buy fonts and use fonts. And this is definitely a conversation for the next time I interview you, because
Yes.
we definitely have a ton more to talk about. But it was really, it's the Wild West. And that's what you're talking about. It's this golden age. It's actually a rebirth or a new birth. It's a realization of other users besides just designers. But then you're also, you know, it is kind of Wild West. Who can make these? Who can use these? And how can they use these to grow businesses or create businesses? And what are they doing with it? And now you're giving them some very needed foundation. I was talking to Johnny Gwynn, who was here earlier today, and he said a lot of people will just start, they want to build their business, but they want to start on level 3 and move up instead of building a really strong, firm foundation. And I think that's what you're doing with Fontribute. That's also what you're doing with Type Thursday, because it is a community. I do believe that we are better when we are together. So we are better as type designers, as regular designers, as UX, UI, as actually all people, if we come in and we have some accountability and we say, hey, here's what I've made. Can you tell me if this would be, because again, we can't just look at just from our perspective. I think there's a huge gap that's missing if we do that.
Couldn't say it better myself. I absolutely agree, Diane.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you were able to do this Saturday, and I'm glad that Stephanie and a few other people could come in and see part 2, which was not totally the same. We covered a lot of the same things, but there definitely is still a bunch of stuff I still want to cover. So I'm going to get you back on, and I'll make sure that there's any issue with my fingers and hitting record for the next time. But I really, really do appreciate it. And I want to just make sure everybody hears on iTunes and on YouTube and on rechargingyou.com, how people can get to follow you. So you can actually go to facebook.com/Type Thursdays. And that's kind of like Type Thursday headquarters, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And then you also have on Instagram, your Type Thursday NYC, the New York chapter, Type Thursdays.
SF, San Francisco.
Yeah. And it's just Thursday, not Thursdays.
There's no
right?
plural. Yeah. Singular, not plural.
And then Type Thursday LA. And then there's also over in the link and in the show notes, there was the Type Thursdays New York, the Google thing in December. And then the YouTube channel is underneath, but if you just search for Thomas Jockin or Fontribute, you can do that. And then I'm going to actually share how people can actually follow you personally and see some of maybe the work that you're doing for all kinds of things that you're posting. Maybe some Type Thursday stuff too, but you can also. So on Dribbble, you're Jock in the Box, JOCKIN the box. And then on Instagram, it's Jock in the Box again.
Yes.
And then on Twitter, it's @Thomas Jockin. So I hope you guys will follow and get involved and maybe even think about starting a Type Thursday chapter in your city.
Hey, love to hear from you if that's the case.
Yeah. So the best way for people to do that, if they wanted to, is maybe go to the Facebook and send Type Thursday, the main one, a message, or they can go. What if somebody wanted to do that? What would they need to do? How could they get in touch with you?
Well, definitely be in contact with either me directly or Type Thursday. You can either contact the Facebook group or you can contact me directly. I will say before we go, heads up, is that next week is Type Thursday New York. That's happening on February 23rd. And then the following week, we have Type Thursday LA starting, and Type Thursday New York's March is also happening then. So if you catch us in time, go sign up. We'd love to have you come to Type Thursday. It's going to be a great time. I'm super excited about it. And thank you, Diane, for having me on the show. It's been a really great pleasure.
Absolutely. So if somebody wanted to sign up, they would go where?
Sign up. Basically, the best way to do it is to go through the Facebook page, the Facebook group. That's the best way to do it. Yes. So
facebook.com/Type Thursdays. That's the best way. No matter where you're going, that's how you're going to get your ticket.
Exactly.
Okay. And also you can get on the email newsletter,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, we have a mailing list. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Thomas, thank you so much again. And just for anybody else, if you want to reach out to me, I'm at Design Recharge. And then you can always send me an email at diane@rechargingyou.com. And we are off next week. I'm going to a confrontation workshop, which is hopefully it'll be interesting, which I think is funny that we were just talking about that. And then we'll be back the March 1st with Jason Craig, who is one of the most, he and Thomas probably are neck and neck in how many books they read a year. Like, I think both of you read, you just must be like speed readers, but I'm super slow. So, but it's really good. I think me and Thomas were talking about this earlier. Reading is amazing, and I'm super thankful that I still read and learn. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. Jason's just started his own company, and we're going to talk about making that big step out. So thank you guys for coming, and thank you, Thomas, for doing this twice. And I will have a good time confronting people, I'm sure, Rachel.
Yes. Conflict is the way.
That's the answer, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you guys, and we'll see you next week or in March 1st.
In 2 weeks. Take care, guys.
Bye.